Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and today we have some sad news because you may have heard that on the 1st of February 2023 we lost Kit Hesketh-Harvey. Now, Kit Hesketh-Harvey was one of those people who could do almost anything. He was a writer, a translator, a performer, a singer, a lyricist and a great deal more, but he was, I think, best described as a man of theatre, and very possibly a Renaissance man of theatre. And he had the most amazing career. He worked for the BBC in the 1980s. He wrote the script for the film Morris in 1987. He studied with Stephen Sondheim at Oxford. He was the winner of the Vivian Ellis Award for Musical Theatre Writers, and that was in 1988. He appeared in cabaret for over 40 years, probably most famously as part of Kit and the Widow, and then following that as part of Kit and McConnell. He appeared in Salad Days on the theatre, and also Cowardly Custard and Tomfoolery, the reviews for Noel Coward and Tom Lehrer. He appeared at the Royal Albert Hall as part of the first ever BBC comedy prom, and he was a permanent fixture, one might almost say, on the radio, particularly in Just a Minute. And only recently was appearing as a big bad villain in pantomime. On top of that, he translated operas and operetta into English, including The Bartered Bride, La Belle Helene, La Traviata, and many others. And even that list does not really do the man justice. If you were to read the obituaries of the last few days, you will see that what he was, I think more than anything else, was loved. Loved as a professional and for who he was as a person. And he will be terribly missed in the profession, by audiences, and by me. Because I had the pleasure of interviewing Kit Hesketh-Harvey on 3 occasions, and I got to know him sufficiently well that when he and I occasionally bumped into each other at an event, normally a show business event of some variety, and we saw each other, he would always come over and say just a few words. He was the kind of man who could walk into your life and light it up with a single sentence, and so often did. The word kind has been bandied around quite a lot by the people who knew him, and I think that's very fair. He was certainly very kind to me, and my memories of him are entirely positive. He was a delightful man, and he continually delighted. He was also incredibly versatile, as you will have already realised from the description I've given. And so, over this week and next, we here on Musical Talk have decided we think it's entirely fitting that we remember Kit Hesketh-Harvey in his pomp, if you like, talking about some of his theatrical endeavours with that sparkling charm and that rapier sense of humour, tinged with just a sense of ribaldry that made him so delectable and such a delight to talk to, and, I hope, listen to. And the 3 interviews that we recorded with Kit over the years, I think really underline his versatility. He's famous for being a comic, funny man, but he was also serious and passionate. And so this week we're going to hear 2 interviews, which I think really showcase that positive comedy side of his personality. And next week we'll be hearing an interview where he talks about the more passionate things that drove him. Because next week we'll be talking about his production of La Traviata, which he had translated and directed for the Merry Opera. But this week we'll be concentrating on his lighter comedic side, both on the stage and behind it. The first interview you're going to hear today was recorded in 2010 at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it's a chance to hear Kit and his then comedy cabaret partner, Richard Sisson, who used to perform under the name The Widow, hence their cabaret double-act name, Kit and the Widow. And you'll hear in this conversation all the bubbling humour that you might expect from someone like Kit. It was a lovely conversation talking to the two of them. And then after that, there's another chance to hear the conversation I had with Kit on his own about his 2011 production for the Merry Opera of La Belle Helene by Offenbach, which he translated into English, which he also directed, and which he, I think rather amusingly, renamed Troy Boy. Now, I should just say that we recently repeated this interview about Troy Boy with Kit last year as part of my episode where we looked at musicals based around the legend of Troy, in an episode called I Love You Big Horse. However, it's too good an interview not to hear again, and this episode of tribute to Kit would not be complete if we didn't include it. And, of course, it's another way of showcasing Kit's comedy side, taking a 19th century libretto in French and turning it into a sparkling 21st century libretto in English, and then directing it to make all that comedy shine. So, to recap, in tribute to Kit Hesketh-Harvey, today we'll be hearing a 2011 interview with Kit about his then new show Troy Boy, and before that, a wonderful interview from 2010 with Kit and the Widow about Kit and the Widow in performance. I genuinely hope that you enjoy these conversations and that they help illustrate the life of that most talented, delightful of men, Kit Hesketh-Harvey. You're listening to Musical Talk. Now, forgive me, you are, if I may say, the premier cabaret act of the country. Am I pushing that too far?
Don't tell Dilly. Mustn't tell Dilly that.
Adele's up. They're up tomorrow, aren't they, I think?
Yes. You can't get a ticket, but then, of course, they're only doing one show. They're the sort of people who don't chip away at the cold face of the fringe. They just come and cream off the profits.
They're spreading themselves really thick.
I'll pass that on.
Please do.
We love them, obviously, and we have worked closely with them.
In fact, we did a lovely project with Dilly. We did the tomfoolery show.
Which
is Valera, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was a real... We were, of course, terrified of working with Dilly because, she's a man-eater. She eats anything. And we were frightened of working with her because she's a very demanding mistress and insists on... Can I use the R word, do you think? Rehearsal.
Oh, my God.
That sort of thing. And so we were very out of our depth, but she was just a pussycat.
And she was so sweet and funny on tour, and brilliant in the show, just brilliant. I mean, she has that sort of comic persona that she inhabits, which actually is a million miles away from her real character, and which cabaret does, I think. Cabaret is a way of finding one's own persona and just pushing it to the slightly preposterous.
Ever so slightly heightened.
No, I think it has to be preposterous. I think if you look at the great cabaret singers, the sort of Miss Tanguettes and the George Mellys and the Noel Cowards and the Marlene, there is something faintly preposterous about them, and that's the little magic jigger of ingredient.
But I think the truth is that they are a version of themselves. It's not an invented character. As a stand-up comic, you can do character work and sketch, but I think as a cabaret artist, you have to be just a bigger, vulgar, even more appalling version of what you really are. I can't believe I'm saying this.
No, it's so true, I think, and that breaks down the fourth wall, which is, of course, what cabaret is. Cabaret is the one that there is no proscenium march. You go out and you work off the audience. You have to bounce off the audience, find correspondence in the audience, and play on those improvisatorily.
Speaking of Dilly, my favourite moment in Tomfoolery where Kit was out the front being a preposterous, extravagant version of himself as only he can. And Dilly and I were playing a duet on the piano, and we just used to talk all the way through. Oh, you're going to do that today? Oh, that's nice. I like it. Oh, left hand. Very good. It wasn't at all supportive, but enormous fun.
Actually, forgive me, you've touched on something quite interesting. You've mentioned Tom Lehrer, you've mentioned Noel Coward. Who do you see as your influences? Because, forgive me, a lot of people say Flanders and Swan.
Please, I mean, there couldn't be any higher praise. I honestly think that Flanders is the greatest lyricist we've ever had, and I include Gilbert and I include Coward and, to an extent, Sondheim in that. But we both had colonial childhoods, and I know exactly who my influences are because we only had 3 records in East Africa that had made it out to the veranda. And
6 sides, though.
6 sides, yeah, and they were Flanders and Swan, and they were Julian Slade, and they were in Salad Days. His Salad Days, and they were Noel Coward in Las Vegas. So I know exactly. Until the age of 7, that's all I ever heard. apart from, fabulous East African tribal music. But
it's not a bad pedigree.
Would you like to hear about my 3 records?
Please.
One was the Flopsy Bunnies, the other was the Tchaikovsky First Bell Concerto, and another one was Scottish Reels.
Oh, there! I think all human life is there. Did you have the Flopsy Bunnies? Because I had the Flopsy Bunnies. We're a happy family.
And they were like
which were written by David Croft of Dad's Army.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
they were.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, Julia. Hugh Grant had it as his desert island disc.
He's
the Flopsy Bunnies. He's a
thing.
camp old pussy, isn't he?
So the Flanders Swan plays very heavily in your background.
Hugely.
1/3, in fact.
Well, exactly, and I can't think of a higher standard, really.
The thing is, nobody's genuinely creative to start with. You're just a blend of all the influences that make you.
And you don't believe in native genius?
Well,
you wouldn't.
Forgive me, having spent 30 years strapped to you, I don't.
I'll take any of this out if you
What
want.
about the Mozart thing? I mean,
No, listen to early Mozart, and it's sort of, you can see the germs of it, but it's as he accumulates the experience of life, and it's not just about the influences.
so
of
genius
music.
is a germ, is it?
Yes, it is. You can catch it off a toilet seat.
I've tried.
Oh, keep that in.
I wipe my genius away after. It's very vulgar.
I'm sorry. Yes. So how do we get to this?
Well, influences, I think. Was
Influence. Yes, and Noel Coward, of course, who knows all the tricks as Flanders in writing comedy lyrics, which are sort of triple rhymes. And the great advantage with the comedy song is that you've got the musical phrase and the lyrical and rhyme and joke phrase, all those elements all working together. And if you make them all land at the same time, then you've got a joke that's infinitely funnier than it should have been.
And lasts.
And lasts because it's crafted and it's provided that your subject matter isn't completely topical. We won't be able to sing about President Saakashvili in Georgia for very much longer, will we? But
and he was right up there at the top.
He was right. Oh, he's in the show, old Saakashvili.
The other reason it lasts is that it's a really lot more effort to learn a new song than it is to learn a new joke. So, it's just seriously, it's a slight problem with cabaret in that modern media demands a turnover of material. So, you can do a topical news quiz with comedians and a team of writers and change it every week. But it's really hard to do that with music-based material. And TV just consumes it, and it's hard, therefore, to keep up the volume of material. So you have to make it last. You have to ration your output a little bit.
And also, I think there's another problem with the television, is that cabaret simply doesn't work on television. That television is so scripted and so rehearsed and so overlit and so hysterical that there's no subtlety, there's no stepping through the fourth wall at all. You can't go off script and start working on one particular member of the audience. Cabaret is about that room, those people, that night, and it's different every night.
And the problem with TV, because there's a visual element to it, it's much harder to edit, which is why all the new comedy ideas, all the exciting new strands come from radio, first of all, because the options to edit there are so much greater that you can have a freedom of expression when you're making the material. So it's a tricky one.
Can I take you back to your earliest days? Now, you went to Cambridge, but certainly according to your fantastic website, by the way, one of the wittiest websites I've ever read.
It's filthy.
Yes, it's wonderful. And the photographs alone are worth a visit, if I may say. You say you really sort of got together at the Comedy Club about 1983, is that right?
We were at the Comedy Store in very grand company. It was Alexei Sayle, and it was Dawn and Jenny, and it was Lenny, and it was Aid, and it was Harry Enfield. Who else was there? The Ben Elton boy.
And the girl who came second in Evita.
And the girl who came second in Evita didn't quite get the part. But
she also missed Cats, I think, as well, didn't she?
Just a whisker away from Judi Dench. But it was it was fantastic, and we were the musical act on the Wednesdays.
It's Judi Dench's fault. Elaine Page is all Judi Dench's fault, isn't she?
If she hadn't broken
Actually,
that
she's
leg.
probably a saint, isn't she, on Musical Talk?
You're listening to Musical Talk. You were talking about you're working together at the comedy
store.
Now, when do you were talking about finding your voice, being at first a sum of your influences, but then finding a voice. When do you think that happened? Because you have a very distinctive voice, which is entirely appealing.
Well, I think what the contemporary comedy revolution did was allowed us to take the sort of comic song as in the Flanders and Swan formula and push it to the boundaries that new comedy had. So we're singing some really quite edgy stuff.
Bung Ho Brezhnev.
Well, Bung Ho Brezhnev, yeah, that was our first one, the last Olympic Games, or was it the one before?
5 before.
5 before, oh Christ. But no, I mean, the rest of the comedy store and those comics enabled us to widen the brief of comedy a lot more. But sorry, Widow, I interrupted.
No, there is an interesting conflict in our act between the retro style of acoustic piano and our sort of
posh boys
and sort of, we're not even lounge act really, we call ourselves lounge act, but we have to try quite hard even to be as relaxed as that. It is an old fashioned format, but the content is just to do with the world we live in, and we see it like everybody else does. And that the comedy store was just doing the world we live in, and we were doing it through a different prism, which was sort of interesting, because there are, like a Bill Bailey, for example, is doing treatments through a more vernacular musical idiom.
A more contemporary vernacular.
Yes. So we were different in that way, and I think was part of our language, really by default, because you can only do what you know. And
what you've been brought up to. And the other thing was not thumping the tub at all, and in many ways it doesn't work, but we were very highly musically trained. We were both choral scholars. I'm very highly. I'm
it's starting to wear off now.
It is starting. Yes, we're beginning to lose it. But Widow can do things at a level of technical brilliance that a lot of pianists can't. And
we are a lot better than we need to be, which is not saying an awful lot, but it's a straw we cling to in the dark times.
But it does mean that if we're doing There's No Plumbers Left in Poland to a Chopin fantasy impromptu, that we actually can play that fantasy impromptu. And oh, bless you. Donkey Boy has just come in with some coffee, listeners.
Oh, and a shot.
Oh, and a finger. Would you like an all-butter finger?
I can at this time. With a show to give.
Donkey Boy.
Special credit at the end, I think. And not Don Quixote, for anyone who may misheard, presumably.
Oh, that's quite a good... That might be in tonight.
That'll be in this afternoon.
Don Quixote. You are a wag.
You mean I married a famous footballer? I'm not sure that's entirely true. I'd have noticed by now.
Oh, spoil yourself.
So we were talking about finding your voices and the fact that you were better than you need to be.
I think the time that we found the voice was when Nika Burns, whose children were fascinating Aida, took us on, and she it was who made the widow get up from his piano and speak. It was kind of almost biblical. It was New Testament. Get up, widow, and walk. And the leprous fingers sort of fell and clattered to the ground as he did so. But he did, because for the first year, widow did nothing. Well, not nothing, but just sat there and played. But it's finally got to the point that the Frankenstein monster is beginning to engulf the entire act.
I've gone rather quiet.
In a kind of retrospective homage to your original.
But that was Nika's doing. She was saying, that there is a technical problem with piano double act, is that the pianist, whichever it is kind of chained to his instrument. And if you look at old footage of Flanders and Swan or something, it is a problem. Also, the fact that Michael Flanders, bless him, was in a wheelchair, so that there is that sort of physical.
So a lovely story actually. We were playing in the West End, doing a show at the Vaudeville, I think. And Claudia Flanders, another proper widow, came in to see the show, and she says when the little curtain or whatever it was went up, or the lights came on, and we were there, and we just were, I don't know,
we were white tie,
I think, and sitting at the piano. She said her eyes filled with tears because it was like it can only look one way. You've got somebody sitting at the piano, you've got somebody standing or being beside the piano. And it all unfolds from there, and there's only so much you can do. And if the songs aren't funny enough, it'll get boring very quickly. And it was fascinating to talk with her. Actually, when you talk, I remember sitting in a dressing room with Skellen and Stilgo. We were doing some gala somewhere, and Peter, who would be me, came in and said, "Richard, I think, do you know the thing about Anneka Rice? She's not been on telly for, I don't know, 7 years. I think, can we do anything?" "Oh, it's so funny. I hear them laughing. No, it's marvellous, it's marvellous." And I thought, oh, hello, Peter, I know your world. And it was the sort of combination double act. There's always a sort of dynamic, because you have to be a double act successfully, you have to be different people, the sum of whose parts is better than the individual. But because you're different,
But also the constriction on the pianist means that he tends to be the cowed one. I mean, not just Stilgo and Skellen, but Flanders and Swan, Norman Hackforth and Noel Coward. I mean, all
Frankie Howard and his pianist. "Oh no, darling, she thinks I'm playing now. She's deaf as a post."
Lovely Vera.
Lovely Vera, that's the one.
But sadly, it always turns, it always falls to the pianist to be the one who's bullied and browbeaten. That's my justification. That's my
it's theatre.
The whipping boy.
We can sit there confident behind our fantastically prestigious technique and go, yes, but look what I can do. Just listen to this.
Now, forgive me. Actually, you're both super talented in your own rights and together. And you have appeared in musical theatre in Salad Days.
Yes, that was interesting. The Widow wasn't allowed any lines. I had 8 parts. The Widow was mute.
As we're in here in Edinburgh, I can tell the story about coming to the King's Theatre, and I was playing the part of Troppo, who has the magic piano, and it is a mime part. And so that was lovely, and a great treat to play. And we came to the King's Theatre, and it was to be a signed matinee. And during my mime, she was signing, as if you couldn't understand. It's an international language, mime. I was very offended.
Yeah, you didn't take it too much to heart.
I'm afraid I did. It's still rankled.
Clearly, you're still bitter.
Yes, it's 10 years now. No, maybe 12.
Yeah, Julian's been gathered, hasn't he? Bless him.
Yes, and did you meet Julian?
Oh, a lot. Yes, I knew him very well, and in fact, we worked on stuff together. Dear man, and
everyone says so.
Absolutely charming, faultless manners, and I still think one of the best melodists we've ever had. I mean, terrific stuff. And he started doing Kit and the Widow stuff, when he was at Cambridge, the Cleopatra song and so forth.
Dorothy Reynolds?
With Dorothy Reynolds, exactly.
Here's a lovely story that they would enjoy.
This is getting very lovely, isn't it?
Well, but I think this is what musical talk's about. It
is.
But this is about Julian Slade, and it's about Sark, because we went to play... they've got a new hut there for the entertainments. It's enormous. It's like a Tesco's, isn't it, really? But it's a gift from the Barclay Brothers, and I think it's Ireland. That's a whole other story. But we got to the end of our set, and they're lovely people on Sark, and it's a gig we really enjoy. And some of the firemen, wasn't the fireman, said, sing Teru. Was it Teru?
Teru, this was beautiful, from Freya's Air, which was a musical that Julian wrote about Sark. And it has got the song called Teru, which is the most ravishing.
And we didn't have the music, so he went back to his cottage while everybody sat around and came back with them, and then couldn't find the music. Oh. So we said, what a shame. And we so enjoyed Salad Days. And then Kit sang a line from Salad Days.
If I once start looking behind,
and the whole audience,
at that pitch,
really pianissimo, and the whole audience joined in and sang the thing just like that all the way through.
But it was very sweet because Julian had died the previous summer.
The reason he died, and he was so fond of Sark, and Sark was so proud of the fact that he wrote this lovely music about it. It was really touching, very touching moment.
Slight change of key.
Yes.
You've also written for musical theatre in other forms. May I present you with the Barbican Can-Can?
Oh, that was... You haven't found a recording of that. It was a magnificent thing. It was I wanted it to be like the sort of that great chorus of When the Foeman Bears Steel in Parks, Benz. We get 3 tunes fitting together. And so I constructed this fantastic thing. The real Barbican Can-Can lasts for 12 minutes and has 3 counterpoints working at once. And the audience was meant to be singing different bits of it. And it would have been fantastic. It would have been Zadok the priest. And of course, because I was too busy to go to rehearsals, I turned up to watch this thing. It had been cut down to 4 lines of half of one theme. It was a very bald little thing. It's cruel of you to laugh. I haven't heard this story. Cruel of you to laugh. So I sat there with a Richter smile thinking, they've completely fucked that up then.
Does the full version exist? Is there
yes, it's glorious somewhere. Shall I send it to your pod?
Well, seriously, if you actually would like to, I'd be delighted, because we do like to showcase things. Obviously, all copyright subsists with you.
Of course, it is. Blah, blah, blah.
But that's, no, seriously, that would be fantastic.
In that case, there's an unperformed Julian Slade Kit Hesketh-Harvey musical, if you like, called Dear Brutus.
Is it really?
Yes. Yeah. Because we were working on it and he died.
Yes. Oh. How far did you get?
It's more or less there.
Is it really?
Didn't we do a number from it with the Const Orchestra?
Yeah. Yes, we did it on Friday night.
That was a very special... Friday Night is Music Night is one of the few live radio programmes, okay? And there's very little live broadcasting these days. There used to be a lot more, but Friday Night is Music Night is one, and it's a 2-hour programme with a huge orchestra and visiting artists and a presenter. So, and it's got to be timed out with the news and all that stuff. Anyway, so we've done it quite a lot, and we've done all the clean songs we can on radio too. So when we were asked again, we were a bit short, so we did a couple of songs, and then we said, we'll do another thing. I'll play a little novelty piece with the orchestra. And Kit, in homage to Julian,
who had just died then.
we'd do this lovely song from the musical they wrote together. So I did an orchestration of it, and Kit, obviously too busy to come to rehearsal.
The R word.
The R word again. So I showed him the dots, and I said, and it goes, and you'll hear the cor anglais, and it slithers down, and it lands on the tom, and you're in. It'd be lovely.
It was a very subtle, rather complex and elusive orchestration. I could barely hear the core bloody R.
Anyway, this gorgeous. So rehearsal, it sounded lovely, and I know his voice, so we were able to leave a lot of nice space in the baritones, little flutes above and low clarinets. Gorgeous. And what was the first line? Midsummer Eve, you see. So we say, lovely, and Julian, we miss him, and we'd like him to know that this is especially for him, The orchestra starts a little harp, and then on and on, it just blooms the sound, and then here comes the cor anglais, and into the lyric, nothing. Just a pulse of the tonic chord. Complete silence. Conductor looking sideways, beating, and Kit really, I think I'm just playing a little bit on the piano. And in with the second line.
Turn round the yard. It was
full throat. It was
gorgeous.
But fortunately, nobody knew what the song should be, so nobody moved.
I was going to say, did anyone? That's the horrible thing. You pour your life into these things, and not everyone spots it.
The conductor did, and I don't think we've been asked back onto
there are two boys up here who, unwisely on their flyer at the festival, have declared themselves to be the fusion of the Bard and Kit and the Widow. So they're quite driven mother, who's lovely, invited us to the show. So I've been, and I did enjoy it enormously. And the boys were asking for some advice afterwards. And I was saying, like when you came to see our show, which was the first performance we gave up here, there were some rather duff moments at the piano where I didn't know what I was doing, and one has little accents. He said, yes, but what I have learned is that there's all sorts of stuff you can get away with and nobody's got the slightest idea. And I thought that's quite good. He's going to a canny lad. He's learnt that lesson already.
And Topping and Butch billed themselves as Kit and the Widow, didn't they? Which is very, very much more vaudeville than us.
I know. I've stumbled across their action.
They work in latex.
They're so successful now.
Which is a part of London, isn't it? Normally the East, I guess.
I think we may start billing ourselves as a version of them, actually.
Topping and Bitch.
Bitch, yeah. They're on the ascendant, yes.
But that's hugely flattering. I mean, forgive me, but you are now so firmly part of the show.
No,
this is
we are
establishment
very,
and firmament.
very old. No, this is our 27th consecutive Edinburgh Festival. I mean, it's terrifying. But we do Edinburgh because it means that you have to write more or less a new show each year. And terrible little fetuses are thrown out onto the A1 to sort of in a puddle of placenta as we return. But we do come back with maybe 2 or 3 nuggets from this experience. And you know that this is the best audience you're going to get. They're bright, they're sharp, they're clued up. They if it doesn't work in front of this audience, it's not going to work anywhere.
It's like if you can't find casual love up at the Edinburgh Festival, it means you aren't going to, and it's the same with the audience. If you can't please this one,
how disappointing you.
And you've depressed me knowing. So.
That was to use your word, tangential, I think, wasn't it? Are you hanging up your dancing shoes, Whittier?
More genital than tangential. Yes, thank you.
No, I love orthography jokes. No, carry on.
I'm sorry, my train of thought is slightly derailed. I do apologise. But we were talking, I think, about how you have now become influences for other people. How does that make you feel?
Awful thought.
But wonderful too.
We came up to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, which is the drama section, is run by a wonderful woman called Maggie, who I worked with when I worked for TAG, which is the education outreach branch of the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow. And she's been to various drama colleges, and she's asked Kit and I to go and do little, evenings and so on to help her students. And this time, we'd never been as far as Glasgow. And I said to Maggie, oh, look, the things are such a long way. Is there anything else we can do while we're there? Can we do some... And before I knew what I'd said, teaching, that's the word that had come out of my mouth. And I do a fair bit of teaching, but I don't know that Kit had done very much. And so Maggie said, yes, I'll organise it. So we tipped up. And I have to say, I don't know if I've said this, Kit was marvellous with them.
Oh, thank you.
But it's not that the students were particularly impressionable. They were all very talented. It's just you don't realise how much you learn just by surviving. Mm. We just have done it for so long that, we haven't learned it very quickly, but eventually it's not as bad as it used to be.
And also, the other thing I cling to is that old age actually is quite a good thing for a cabaret person. And
not Withereth.
It doesn't. No, they blew meth. And if you think about it, I mean, Coward didn't hit his stride till he was 50 in cabaret. Dietrich never got into her rhinestones for cabaret until she was well into her 60s. George, is
this going to go on?
It is on and on and on. And
it's not nearly over.
We did a gig with poor George Milley, who I adored, who died last year, and he was deaf as a post at this stage, and pretty sort of frail, and so deaf that he decided during a 32-bar break to sit down and just take the weight off his slingbacks, and he sat with his quite considerable bottom onto the keyboard of what are they called, a Roland, a synthesizer. And there was this hideous banshee squeak. I mean, if you sit on a synthesizer and it's going through the speakers.
A high chord cluster.
A high chord cluster.
Certainly afterwards.
A high colonic. And the audience was just screaming in agony. He had no idea, bless him. He just sat there. He was doing it all through his feet like a cobra. But it was... that sense of the slightly... the Maurice Chevalier said, Goebens for little... You wouldn't get away with that anymore, would you? No. For little girls. But...
I'm not sure, speaking of great cabaret legends, whether you'll ever be able to top the performance you gave on Bob Holness and Friends on Radio 2. It was while we were in salad days, wasn't it? And we thought it was like a radio thing. And so we'd been rehearsing it. It was a very hot summer. And we turned up, to do it straight from rehearsal in sort of shorts and T-shirts. And Kit had been dancing. And it's a considerable effort to move that body weight around. And so we were very stinky and we arrived. And Marion Montgomery, a wonderful, wonderful, lovely. I mean, she taught us sound checks, didn't she? Ride me like the bull you are was her line. Isn't that right? Anyway.
I'll use that as a trailer, by the way.
Absolutely. Please. We love Marion. And she said, darlings, you're not going on like that. And we said, how do you mean going on? There's an audience. And so the radio theatre was packed with people. And of course, Marion had 8 different outfits for each song. So we went on dressed in the things that Marion wasn't prepared to wear that night. So I was in a loosely belted kimono with a bamboo. I can't remember what you wore, but it was more...
Mine was more shantung, I see. It was like a sort of maternity gown. Yes, it was wonderful.
We've performed as Marion Montgomery, so that, will we ever reach those heights again? I don't know.
A serious final question in many ways. Widow, does your car really smell of tin mackerel? As your website declares.
It needs updating, the website, doesn't it? These jokes mean nothing to me.
No, it's because
Daisy.
It was he always travelled with Daisy, his late dog, and the late dog always had a very late, indeed, can of half-open dog food in the back of the car. So it did honk. I mean, people couldn't get in there without physically retching.
Do you know what a flavour saver is, Thos?
I don't know.
No, a flavour saver is one of those little beards you grow just below your lip, so that you can taste perhaps what you had for dinner the night before, or I don't know.
So it's resonance of Prandial's past.
Yes, absolutely. It's called a flavour saver. And Daisy had a diet of dried dog food, which was a schnauzer. She was a schnauzer, and it was rather boring. So I used to spice it up with a little mashed mackerel from a tin, half a tin at a time, with sort of oil and stuff. And schnauzers have big eyebrows and a beard. And so she would savour the flavour, both in her eyebrows and her beard, because she was a good, solid eater, that was by Daisy. And she would live in the car as we toured around, so it used to smell of tin.
But like most doggy people, they're completely inured to the smell of their cars, and when other people simply cannot get in without having to hang out to the window and vomit.
Like the dog would.
Like the dog.
So, yes, I'd forgotten that was on there, because Daisy's now gathered and gone to the great...
But Widow's still sniffing a lot of bottom, so it carries on.
On that, more than the sentence must be that it's all image. But thank you. I'd like to thank you both for your time and
Huge
for one
pleasure.
of the most entertaining interviews I've managed.
I can't believe we were more interesting than Elaine Page. I simply will not hear those words.
I'll write them down for you if that helps.
Thank you, Thos, very much.
Can we use that on our flyer next year? More interesting than Elaine Page.
Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast. Kit, it's lovely to see you again, if I may say.
It's lovely to be seen.
Troy Boy, La Belle Helene, operetta, An unusual move for you? Or not an unusual move, because you have a huge raft of experience in this field under your belt.
Under my belt,
but
but
perhaps don't know it.
as principally as an adapter and a translator, this is the first time since university, really, I've ventured into being on that side of the stage. Obviously, I've been directed myself many a time and often in Kit and the Widow, and in stage shows we've done like Tomfoolery with Dilly Keane and Salad Days, which we did in the West End, under the guidance of Ned Sherrin, may he rest in peace. But this is the first time, as I say, since Cambridge that I've actually been at the helm, which is faintly sickening, but I'm having huge fun, and they're a wonderful, wonderful young company, all fresh and open to ideas and full of ideas. And they're contributing just as much as I am, which is terrific.
So let's go back to the text.
Mm-hmm.
It's Offenbach's 1864 operetta La Belle Helene,
Something
which is
like
Helen
that.
of Troy, basically.
Helen of Troy, but it's his complete piss take. Can I say piss take on a podcast?
As often as you can.
Of Greek history, in as much as it's very much a sort of Asterix version, Frankie Howard version of Sparta and Troy. And it's done with a very heavy nod and a wink to the contemporary state of France at the time, and the Troisième Empire, and the sense of decadence that was beginning to prevail. So and it's about the sex war. It's about men subjugating women, women being treated as trophies, which Helen ultimately was, and about the world of Zeus, the masculine martial world of Zeus, where we start, to the world of Aphrodite, the world of sensual free love. And it's basically a Shirley Valentine story, that a woman is trapped in a dreary marriage. She finds a beautiful Greek boy, and will she see it through? And what will be the consequences? In Shirley Valentine, she goes back to Liverpool, and it's all buried again. In Helen's case, she starts the Trojan War and launches the 1,000 ships. But we've also rediscovered, unlike the Eno production, we've included another aria for Helen in Act 3, which kind of flings down the gauntlet to men in an almost feminist way. It's sort of saying the gods were invented by men. Destiny, which she's always feeling a victim of throughout the piece, is an invention of men. Why should she, Helen, capitulate and buckle down to all these artificial mores imposed on her if she's married to a dreary man for political reasons, and if she's fallen in love with a beautiful boy, then she should be allowed to go off with a beautiful boy. So at the end, she actually rejects the whole paraphernalia of Greek mythology and makes her decision.
Splendid. How did you come across this extra song, as you said?
I didn't. Our lovely director, Stephen Hose, musical director, found it and said, how about this? At the Eno, we had 2 intervals. Here we're doing it with 1, which means that Act 1 is an hour and a quarter, and Act 2 was about 25 minutes. So we had to find something to make Act 3 more substantial, and I hope that this will do it. She steps completely out of character, out of time, and just sings on behalf of women everywhere, which is an apt role, I think, for somebody of that sort of iconic status of Helen of Troy, who's always just been perceived as a dumb blonde, and a sort of a hapless victim. But here we have her actually make her decision, which is not what Pauline Collins made.
But it's very much more like Jane Mansfield, bizarrely, who was always perceived as a dumb blonde, but could speak, I think, 9 different languages.
Oh yes,
or something
bright as a button, wasn't she? Yeah, yes. And Uma Thurman.
Yes, of our current ilk.
Of our current epoch. Yeah.
So how did you, if you don't mind me asking, you first translated this in 2006. How did you connect with Offenbach in the first instance?
I'd done...
Apart from the usual dating sites.
Apart from the usual dating sites. I'd done an awful lot, actually, of translations of 19th century operetta for various companies, for Grange Park, for English touring opera, for Scottish opera, and indeed at the moment I've got The Merry Widow going around with Opera North in Giles Havigal's wonderful production. And it wasn't a field I felt completely unfamiliar with. What happened with La Belle Helene was that it was the Châtelet production from France, directed beautifully by Laurent Pays, and we had Felicity Lott and Toby Spence, Rolls-Royce cast, as Helene and as Paris. the French production was brought over wholesale to the Eno, complete with production team. Who then discovered that it being the Eno, they had to do it in English. I think there was a certain amount of tension in that decision. And because the Colosseum is such a vast space and because we had such enormous resources, it became a very different show to what I think this will be, which is much trimmer and slicker and younger. We don't have a chorus, we have a band of 6, orchestra of 6. It's going, I hope, to be much more like a sort of café-concert in Paris, where the fourth wall completely disappears, or in the Eno's case, the vast proscenium arch and the yawning orchestral pit in front of it. And here there's a lot of interaction with the audience. We get the audience up on stage at various points. There is lap dancing. It's the whole thing. It's like a sort of naughty night out in Belle Époque Paris.
And that's very much the ethos of the Merry Opera Company, isn't it? With which you're working on this piece. They am I right in thinking they're trying to introduce what people might see as opera and operetta to a new traditional music-going, even pantomime audience?
I think so. I think it's. I've aimed this squarely at the woman who actually buys the tickets, who is a nice woman from Chislehurst in her late 30s, who's trying to prop up her marriage, so she's very much our sort of link with our audience.
And if you are that person, listeners, please do buy those tickets now.
So the other thing about Merry Opera, who were hitherto called unexpected opera, is they do it in less expected venues. I mean, some of our places, like the Norwich Playhouse or the Chipping Norton Theatre, are standard theatres. But we open in a Wetherspoons in Tunbridge Wells, and we then decamp for a longish run at the Gatehouse in Highgate, in a room upstairs from a pub. I mean, it's a distinguished fringe venue, but it is basically a room above a pub, and the dressing room doubles up as the audience crush bar, so you're very likely to bump into a half-naked Greek slave as you sip your gin and dubonnet, or ouzo, I hope, in this case.
There are several pubs in London where you can do that anyway.
Well, I think
but
so.
Here you get a show as well.
Here you get the show as well, yes, exactly.
Now, can I ask you a few questions about your approach to translation, if you don't mind me saying? Because we've had a conversation before where you said the 3 records you had as a child were Gilbert, Flanders and Coward, I think.
Coward. No, there wasn't a Gilbert, actually. It was Julian Slade. It was Salad Days. But
Shift gears by 100 years.
Exactly, shift gears by 100. And there's a very wonderful production of Salad Days going on at the moment at the Riverside, which I must try and see. But
so that's very much in the British school.
It is, and it's
but
something.
But you also have Sondheim connections. So when you sit down with a foreign text,
well, I have, Stephen on my shoulder, saying the first thing to establish is tone, is the hardest thing to do. Second, intelligibility. And although Sondheim is known for his rhymes and celebrated for his rhymes come a very long way down the list. I think what you have to do is be true to the character. You have to make it absolutely intelligible on first hearing to an audience. But in music, if you're translating comedy lyrics, which is what I principally do, from whatever language. I've even done Czech for Covent Garden, which I don't speak a word of.
A free translation.
A free translation. Well, I had the great Charles Makeras on my shoulder then, who does speak Czech and is very exacting. Bless him.
You have the most marvellous shoulders. If
I have got some very distinguished parrots on my shoulder. It's a question of making the gag, if there is a gag, land with the musical phrase and the rhyme all at the same time, and that's when you score exponentially far more than you should for what is probably a fairly weak joke. But sometimes there's remained true to character, and in this case there is a very what makes it not English and Gilbert and Sullivan is Act 2, that there's a fantastically sensual Act 2 in the bedroom when she very, very nearly she gets into bed with Paris, and they very nearly do the dirty deed when she's interrupted. And that's a long, extended thing, which makes us really... Sorry,
splendid
that's terrible.
Choice of words.
And believe me, I think we're going to see it. I've completely lost my thread. It's a very long, beautiful, wonderfully written in that sort of barcarolle reverie that Offenbach is so good at. Sort of sensual, romantic dream, which hopefully makes us absolutely care about Helen and realise that here is a sensual woman just waiting to be awakened. and about the sensual power of Aphrodite. And it's more intimate, it's more real, it's more truthful than anything in Gilbert and Sullivan, and it's not done with a nod and a wink.
Well, in a way, I think you must have hit the nail on the head there, because Gilbert and Sullivan are splendid in my book, absolutely. But one of the things I very much enjoy about them is the fact that they don't shilly-shally around with all the wet stuff.
All the wet stuff. Well, no, there's yards of the wet stuff in here. And the French do it consummately well. I mean, not just Offenbach, but Meyerbeer and Debussy and all those guys knew how to express the power of love in a way that's become sort of what is the word? Brain going. End of the day. In a way that we absolutely associate with the French.
Oh, right.
That the French can sing about love. Edith Piaf can sing about love far better than any Englishman or Englishwoman.
To be able to balance the two, and in fact to combine them, to make them integrated, is in fact actually a great skill, which is not a British skill, I think, in terms of...
I think you're absolutely right.
A great deal of theatre.
Yes.
Theatre.
I mean, one has to watch out, because as soon as you do anything that's late 19th century and light-hearted in English, it will sound like Gilbert and Sullivan. Yes. And we have to try and move that away with costume, with lighting, with acting, and with finding in our extremely decorative and wonderfully sung Paris and Helen a romantic truth in there.
So how do you, forgive me saying, how do you keep yourself away from falling into the traps of Gilbert? Or anyone else, but I use Gilbert as the obvious.
Yeah, no, obviously, and Gilbert was an enormous master, and I absolutely respect him. I think
he did translate Offenbach on one occasion.
Did he?
He did The Brigand. It's the only Gilbert and Offenbach.
My lord, I must look at that. Well, it was an original libretto he did with collaborator.
Oh, no.
He translated an original.
It was the Gilbertian translation.
I see.
Yes. I think in the 1890s, after his trouble with Sullivan.
After he had a bit of his run-in with his collaborator. I think you have to avoid Latinate words. You have to resist jokes. You have to avoid intrusive rhymes. And that, again, was a lesson that Sondheim taught me. If it's not appropriate... that she make a clever rhyme at this point, then you don't do it. And Sondheim...
If she won't, you don't.
If she won't, I don't, exactly. And Sondheim is always famously castigating himself for I Feel Pretty. That's his big set example, that as a young man, he made Maria sing stuff that a simple Puerto Rican girl never would, and rhymes too clever.
She was pretty and witty and gay.
And yes, and a committee and, all that stuff, which is inappropriate. And that's what he meant, I think, by tone and truth to the character and truth to the dramatic mood. I mean, having said that, the palace surroundings in the world of Sparta is absolutely royally sent up, and also presupposes, which is tricky for a 21st century audience, a knowledge of the Greek myths, which isn't instantly familiar, but would have been to the 19th century educated audience. So they know that there are two... In the Iliad, the French would have known that there were two Ajaxes, two kings Ajax, which is a huge, great joke in this piece. And we've just had to skirt round by having one as a puppet mini-me on the other guy's arm, who's just slightly demented and always carries this little reassuring puppet of himself everywhere he goes to bolster his confidence.
He's a puppet government.
But having said that, the Mayak and the Ivy original libretto is full of silly gags of the Asterix, the Gaul kind of nature, about ancient Greek history. So we are slightly in Blackadder land as well.
Now, can I ask, do you have free... I mean, you've already explained that this is a reworking of the story in its widest sense, i.e. it's set now in Britain.
Yes.
How free did you feel you could be when translating it? So it seems an obvious question, because I'm sure you're going to tell me fairly free, but in order to keep the spirit of the thing.
Fairly free, but in order to keep the spirit of the thing.
Beautifully put, if I might say. But how much license do you feel that you can give yourself before you're actually moving away from your text, I suppose, is the question I'm very stumbling towards.
I think, again, it's a question of the mood. If you're in Act 1 and you're in this idiotic world of buffoon kings and buffoon Greek heroes showing off, then you can bring in all the anachronisms and all the jokes and all the gags about X Factor that you like. If you are in a different mood, if you're in Act 2, then you have to rein in on all that and make it the sort of stuff that they would have sung in ancient Greece as much as in 21st century Chislehurst. I don't know why I've got it in for Chislehurst. It's a very nice place. But it just seemed that Chislehurst is our sort of imaginary locus. But we do, no, we even when we move into ancient Greece, we've got loads of blackberries going on and gags of that nature. I mean, hopefully they're all frivolous and light-hearted, and they're not sort of concept, and we don't have Verdi on the lavatory or anything like that. But that was absolutely the spirit of the original piece. So why not just, do it for our own time?
Well, here we are 5 years later from your 2006 original translation. Mm-hmm. How did you get the opportunity of directing it? And did you say yes, absolutely, or did you say ooh?
I went ooh, not sure, because as I say, I haven't directed for yonks. And no, the company came to me. They initially said, "Can we use your translation?" And I said, and they said, "And would you like to direct it?" And the thing about a young company of unknowns is that you have very much more freedom of casting. You can actually go for what you want. You're not saying, look, here is an internationally paid diva that we have contracted, and she or he may not be absolutely right for the part, but it's what you've got to work with. Here, we did a big casting session, and we found fabulous kids. I mustn't call them kids, they're all in their late 20s, early 30s, but experienced young opera singers who are much more truthful to the characters as I originally envisaged them. I've had completely to rework the libretto because the translation of the French one wasn't mine, so I had to change all that. But the lyrics, i.e. the words sung to music, are more or less the same. We made one or two changes because of casting, and also there's a very funny second tenor lead, Orestes, who's the playboy son of the king, who in the original French was a trouser role because that was piquant and got the tired businessmen in the front row hot under their collars, but just looks silly now. So we've got a proper boy to sing him, and he's one of those posh white boys who thinks he's black, and it is hilarious. It is hilarious. So he's giving it all the moves, and that's absolutely turned the Orestes scenes into scene stealers. They're fantastic.
And you say you only have a cast of 6?
No. But sorry, an orchestra of 6.
Oh, an orchestra of 6.
And a cast of a dozen. So no chorus, but that doesn't matter because you're very up close in this production, and when you're closer, 12 opera singers going full at you, it sounds like Aida in the Amphitheatro di Verona. It's very loud.
It's easy for you to say. And presumably also because these people don't have the diva personality, shall we say. They propose to turn up for every
They turn up for rehearsals, yes, and they don't chuck because they've got a sore toenail, which is nice.
Yes.
Which is nice, yes.
And how do you generate the tone as a director then?
I think, it's very, very much more easy when you've originated the words they're saying yourself, because they obviously stem from my own character. I find I have a lot of the Greek in me, and because it is written in the French, in jokey rhyming couplets or gaggy rhymes that happen every sort of 4 lines, which is kind of my currency as Kit and the Widow, and so. I think the tone it is kind of sui generis, to use a Latin phrase. I'm sorry, I don't know what the Greek for that is.
I'll ask Mr. Gilbert. The name, however, I have to put this on your plate. I did mention it to a friend of mine who said, "Oh, sounds like a porn film."
The Troy Boys.
I don't know if you have any comment.
No, he hasn't entirely missed the mark, because what we're doing is entering a woman's sensually erotic fantasy. And so if it is a porn film, it's one of those porn films that made by women for women, where
soft focus
and a boy with broad shoulders and too long hair, he is meant to be her junior. So a porn film is going too strong, but I think that there is in that French sensuality something of that. And I do hope that Our Lady from Chislehurst isn't averse to the odd Jackie Collins novel.
Well, I'm sure underneath she'll be loving it. But it's coming together nicely.
Touch wood. I haven't been exposed yet. I've managed to bluff my way through. Yeah, I'm a great one for. I mean, I'm slightly sort of head as a flock of pigeons at the moment, because what I like to do, even in writing a song, is get the whole thing down as quickly as possible and then start working on the detail. So this first week of staging, we've just been whizzing through it and just making the spaces, making the pictures, giving people space in which to express their characters. And I think if you're doing that and you can run it again and again and again for the last week, then a lot of the detail finds itself. And these are intelligent, inventive, vibrant young actors. They will find stuff, and they already are, details in their characters which possibly hadn't occurred to me at all. I do think it's an absolutely collaborative process, and the actors bring as much to it as I possibly could. I'm trying to make them sing more like a French café concert, as I say. So there's more diction, there's more rubato, there's more stopping and starting. But a lot of these, even Helen's big arias, are verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, such as you might hear at Wilton's Music Hall in the 1890s, with a da-dam joke at the end of it. It's trying to make them unlearn a little bit of what they learned at opera school. But mercifully, they're so young in their careers that they haven't got into the pure and wonderful Joan Sutherland line where you can't hear a bloody word she's saying.
No, quite. You have to take it as a whole, with a bit of a run-up, I always
say. Or have read your libretto first. But here we're in a tiny space, virtually all the time, and they're bang in your face, and with a half-decent wind behind us, they'll be able to hear all the words.
Good diction, in fact.
Good diction is the word we're looking for.
Which is back to Gilbert, funnily enough.
Back to Gilbert, and back to my training as a chorister, and then subsequently as a cabaret singer, where the words are supremely important.
Can I ask, has it given you an insight into Offenbach, which you may not have had before? Either good or bad? Is he as good as his reputation says he is?
I think he's very occasionally repetitive. In his plot choices. For example, La Belle Helene is exactly what Orpheus in the Underworld is, with taking the mickey out of the gods, and the same set of gods, actually, to a large extent. And occasionally, but blissfully for me, you get that fifth, sixth thing that you get in the barcarolle. But I'm rather fond of the old boy. I like him because he was clearly a theatrical practitioner. He was a practical man of the stage. He wasn't like Wagner writing up his ivory tower stuff that's almost unperformable, but stuff that absolutely connected with the audience. And we're finding that connection again and again and again, just sort of happening in rehearsals. And I rather like his soft centre, the old darling. It's lovely to be able to write that act too, and mean it, and say that life is a comedy to those who think and he thought. It was never a tragedy to him, I don't think, but he did have a sentimental side, and that sentimental music of his is ravishing and very approachable. And very direct, and it's like the lyrics. It hits you on first hearing. You don't have to go away and study it in music school and cope with hideous dissonances and complicated leitmotifs. It's just there as very serviceable, occasionally very inspired music to serve a practical purpose, which is to entertain an audience for 2 hours.
It's funny you should say that, because you've just described, in a way, his photograph as well. Because
I don't know if I looked much at his
There's a famous picture of him where he's bespectacled, but sort of twinkly.
There is a twinkly,
yes.
Yeah. I suspect he had a wonderful time with some of his chorus girls, and quaffing champagne from their knickers later, after the show. There is that sort of generosity, stop being so bloody moralistic, life's short, let's fall in love and have fun. about him and about this piece.
He's not straight-laced at all.
Not at all, absolutely not at all. Indeed, his ending and my ending are identical. Our Shirley Valentine does go off with her Troy boy and she doesn't go back to Liverpool.
The melodies as well for Offenbach are what people talk about, and I was just listening. I find his tunes tend to lodge in my mind.
They do, and we're all humming them on the tube on the way home. It's not that Offenbach's Belle Helene has got any mighty lollipops. I mean, Orpheus has got the can-can, and Tales of Hoffmann has got the barcarolle, which are way up there, classic FM top 1 and 2. But these, and there are a couple of fabulous marches for the for the pompous Zeusian Greek heroes, and some of Helen's intimate, thoughtful, ravishing arias, which do absolutely hit you first time, and then third time and fourth time because they come round again.
There's a reprise or two, isn't there?
Yeah. He does. He likes his reprises. Well, Claude Michel Schoenberg does the same. If you've got a good tune, let them hear it. Richard Rodgers did the same thing. It's always done in the best possible taste. I mean, it doesn't actually.
I'll have my beer now, thank you.
He doesn't turn it into music hall.
No.
And there is always a commanding and formidable musical composer's intelligence behind it all. But no, he knew the power of a good tune.
I like the King's Couplets, I think it's called. Is it?
Yes, it's great, and all the four high kings of Hellas come downstage and deliver a number, and it's pure Maurice Chevalier. It's great, and it's a very, very catchy little tune.
Yes, that's the one that caught me this afternoon, I must tell you.
And it's in fact how the overture opens. That's what he fires off as his first salvo.
So by the end, everyone's saying, "Oh, I like this one."
We like that tune. It's a great tune. But again, I mean, I think that was Sullivan's gift. That while never tipping over into Tin Pan Alley, he could spin a great melody and wasn't afraid of doing so. Wasn't afraid of being accused of being second-rate for doing so.
No. I mean, do you have an insight into the difference between Offenbach and Sullivan, or? Because I know Sullivan is so often called the British or the English Offenbach, which is a little unfair on the two of them, I always think.
I think they are distinct. I think Sullivan is very well. I mean, he's more English. His antecedents. You can hear Thomas Arne in there. You can hear English pastoral music. You can hear the Beggar's Opera in there. Offenbach's colourings are more subtle. There's more stop and start. He's much freer with his playing with his tempi and changing his tempi, and he's more sparing in his recit than Sullivan could be sometimes. But I think they are both underrated, to tell the truth. I'm a huge fan of Sullivan. So is Dilly Keane. I'm discovering. We're about to go into Cowdy Custard together, and
at the Greenwich Theatre, I think. Is that right?
Are we doing it? I think we are doing it at Greenwich, apart from a few others. We're doing the sort of Waitrose circuit. Anywhere with a Waitrose, we will be playing.
I'll rebuild the Chiswick Hall then. They knocked it down after Shirley Bassey came in 1966. You know, the Chiswick musical.
Didn't need to
Chiswick
after
Empire.
A few of those big notes. I would have thought the whole thing would have crumbled.
So, are you happy to talk a little bit about that?
About Cowdy Custard?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes, why not? I mean, it's terribly... We've only just done one sing-through and we haven't even cast the boy yet, so it's a tiny bit previous, but I'll say what I know.
Well, forgive me, I was going to say, because you have worked with Dilly Keane before. This is you and the Widow.
Me and the Widow, and Dilly Keane, and Liza Pullman, who's another member of the fascinating Aiderettes. Sadly, Adele Anderson is not available. She's got to go to New Zealand, and I'm heartbroken because I would have loved to have heard her sing 20th Century Blues. And then an as yet unnamed boy who's got to be gorgeous because Widow and I are getting very long in the tooth now.
Oh, it's all a matter of taste.
And it's the Cowdy Custard, which was the huge hit of the 1970s, which Coward himself saw just before he died.
72, I think. He came to the Mermaid Theatre.
And it's very Mermaid Theatre. It has occasionally, it's a bit too Mermaid Theatre, like there's an Act 2 opener, which is very with a lot of rather sub-prime Coward Lanjan numbers. It has
that's all his stuff from The Girl Who Came to Supper.
That sort of stuff, yes. And it all
which
goes,
was his last musical show from the early 60s? Or?
It goes a bit Lionel Bart,
yes.
and not that Lionel wasn't fabulous as well, but it's so... And also because of various copyright issues in 1972, there were some songs they weren't allowed to include, which were Coward Crown Jewels, because they were in other shows which were in production at the time. So we're able to, I think Touchwood, the estate, has given us permission to maybe jettison most of the Lanjanya, apart from London Pride, which no one would want to jettison. And we can...
There's poor old Mrs. Brisket going then.
What ho, Mrs. Brisket? Yes, oh God, you don't
Why
like that one.
Why not take a chance and risk it?
Oh God,
straight back 150 years, isn't it?
I remember Victor Spinetti saying the only thing you can do with those numbers is put an extra syllable on the end of each line. So, what ho, Mrs. Brisket? Take a right out of brisket to send it to the back of the cheap seats of the gods. But
it was Tessie O'Shea, wasn't it?
It was. Bless Tessie O'Shea. Raise a glass to Tessie O'Shea. God, she's missed. She was fabulous, wasn't she?
Was. And only passed the last 10 years or so, I think.
Yeah, was she?
Yeah.
She was a good-looking old fat lady. I love good-looking fat ladies.
So you do love a fairy when she's 40?
I do love a fairy when she's 40, and a long way past 40, which I think Tess was by the time Tessie, when I was first exposed to her art. But no, it's Cowdy Custard, and as I say, we'll have another boy, and it's Widow and Dilly and occasionally Liza doing the honours and the ivories. I'm in no position to do the honours and any ivories. We're also going to, because times have changed and we know more about Coward, and Coward had to, as a pre-1964 gay guy, had to bury all that. Going to make some of that a tiny bit more explicit. For example, he wrote what I think is the most beautiful of his songs, and which I think was his favourite song, Matelote, to his longtime companion Graham Payne. And so we're going to put Matelote in and have a boy singing it to a boy. Why not?
Would you be going for the extra verse or Mad About the Boy?
Oh yes, the dirty extra, which is terribly funny, and I won't reveal to your listeners because otherwise they won't come and see. But the rhyme is Myrna
if you're listening
Loy.
to me, they will.
The rhyme is Myrna Loy. I fought for that one. Yeah, please, can I do that? And it'll be lovely to hear Mad About the Boy sung as Coward wrote it, rather than in the Ether Kit version where all the timing goes askew.
Oh, cool. Well, there's so many verses to it, aren't there? Because isn't it supposed to be 4 or 5 people?
4 or 5 people. I think it was done as a review number, and presumably everyone trooped on the stage with their own special spot on them and in their different characters.
Wasn't Joyce Grenfell, I think?
Was she really? She would have been terribly funny.
I think she might have been the schoolgirl.
Who thinks he's prettier than Gary Cooper?
Yes.
Yeah. No, that would be very funny with all those teeth.
Just for our listeners, that's Joyce Grenfell's teeth rather than Gary Cooper's.
Oh no, rather than Gary Cooper's teeth. Did he not write it about Gary Cooper? Isn't that? I think.
Was it Gary Cooper? I always assumed it was Rudolph Valentino. I took
it was meant to be Rudolph Valentino, but I think it was inspired, secretly by Gary Cooper. I think. There you go.
I live and learn.
Well, I may have got that completely wrong, and the listeners will write in.
I heard Peter Greenwell, I think his name was,
who was Peter Greenwell, who was his accompanist.
The last accompanist.
Fantastic.
Yes,
fantastic guy.
He only passed away a couple of
years ago. Yes.
Forgive me, I'm rambling and going off on a tangent here, but I think he wrote the music for the Peter Wilderblood musical, which was called The Crooked Mile, which introduced Millicent Martin.
Gosh.
The most lovely song called If I Ever Fall in Love Again. It will be with someone just like you. It's such a beautiful song.
What a lovely idea
and
for a lyric.
And no one ever sings it anymore. It's such a pity.
What a shame. I took Pete Greenwell around some caves in Barbados, I remember once.
Oh, really?
But that's another story.
Oh, you're such a tempter, a tease. Are there any songs in it which are a little bit off the beaten track? Because I hadn't realised quite how many. Well, he was such a prodigious writer. How many of his songs were not recorded either by him or by anyone, as far as
exactly. And I mean things like the wonderful "We're a Dear Old Couple and We Hate Each Other."
Yes.
Hated one another for a long time, which was right at the end of his career.
Sail Away,
which is just beautiful. Yes, I think they were quite interested when they compiled it, Alan Strachan and his team, in the 70s.
And the late Wendy Toy.
And the late great Dame.
Sorry. Yes.
Not to maybe to mine the unknown seams, because Coward was incredibly current in the 70s, and everybody knew everything. And so I think they did kind of go a bit off-piste and try and find the...
It's Miss Mouse, I think, on the original listing. I don't know if that's made it into your version.
Oh,
I don't know the song at all. I saw it there and I thought, goodness.
Miss Mouse. No, lost on me. Gone back into the skirting board. Don't know.
Scurried away. So you're still performing, obviously, as well. You're much in demand as you're directing now, and you're about to perform and pulling everything together. If
Yes.
Do you ever get to see your family? I have to ask.
Hardly at all. No, there was a slightly terse conversation last night about that. No, mercifully, my children have grown up and fled, so I'm less guilty about that. Yeah, it is terribly busy, and I'm in my white van with a bed in the back, my touring van, rather more than I would wish, especially in this cold weather. But, it's better than not working, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is, yes. And this, I suppose, do you think direction is being revived in you? Is this something you'd like to do further?
Well, shall we see
what
happens?
There's many shows under your belt, aren't there?
See what happens on the first night. I must say, I'm thrilled to have discovered this company, and there are little projects and little irons in the fire. Which were dangling like pieces of raw meat in front of the Arts Council, but of course the Arts Council hasn't got a bean left. So
meat and beans, however, is a fairly tasty dinner. So.
Oh, it sounds nice, doesn't it? Yeah, a bit of meat and beans. So, well, we shall see. I mean,
is there a show you're hankering to do? Either one that you've written yourself, or it's a show that you're...
yes.
Am I at liberty to ask? Or rather keep that powder dry?
I'll keep my powder dry on that one, yes. It's one that has been done before, and... I has done it many times, actually, in about 4 different productions, and I've done an enormous rework on it, and I would very much like to restage it in a sort of Spiegel tent circus space, which it's never been done before with a gypsy orchestra rather than with a West End orchestra, and we'll see. But who knows? I hope I don't crash and burn on the 4th of February, and if I come out of it without too much, dripping off me, I'll
acclaim.
That's absolutely the thing. Then I'll. I would love to do more. Yeah, it's fun, and it's also lovely to, like with the Merry Widow, do all the work and then go back to bed and sit in bed and just think that other people are enjoying it, and you don't physically have to haul your increasingly flaccid old ass around the country to give it to them.
May I ask just one final question?
Of course.
And it's actually more of a sort of philosophical question.
Ooh.
And it's often been argued, not least by me, but other people rather more important and intelligent, that Andrew Lloyd Webber is in fact writing modern operetta.
I think that's very true. Very true.
Can you see a line through him all the way through?
Oh, absolutely.
Back to Ivor Novello, Gilbert and Sullivan, Noel Coward, Bittersweet,
absolutely.
And to Offenbach?
I absolutely can. I mean, his music, he was the son of a very distinguished church organist, and those...
This is Andrew Lloyd Webber.
William Lloyd Webber, his father.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. And presumably learnt an awful lot at his father's knee in that sort of Anglican melodic tradition that that Sullivan, that wasn't afraid of a good tune and repeating a good tune. And I do think that certainly his subjects are more operatic. Mm. I mean, his settings, a Coney Island funfair or a deserted mansion, they're not the immediately identifiable reality of Sondheim settings a lot of the time. I think that's absolutely true, and just the scale and the breadth of his music and the breadth of the intervals he uses. So no, I think that's absolutely arguable. Yeah.
I actually saw Phantom of the Opera relatively recently for the first time.
Oh right. Well, the clue is in the title, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I thought to myself, I suppose it is, absolutely. I hadn't even thought about the obvious, the Scooby-Doo nature of it. But I watched it and I thought, actually, there's a jolly good Gilbert and Sullivan operetta in here. Because some of those characters, if you gave just the tone, if you changed the tone...
Change the tone, like Stevie said.
Yes, you could rework that into a...
Exactly, and you'd be into The Good Companions or something. It'd be great.
What, the recent version with... the recent version, the Andre Previn...
yes, the musical version of it. No, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely the case. So I keep on saying absolutely, and that's a bit sort of hopeless.
So so just to get this absolutely right, it opens at the theatre, which is above the Gatehouse.
Yeah, the Gatehouse in Highgate. We have a couple of sort of preview-y outings. One, as I say, in the Wetherspoons Tunbridge Wells. It's called the Opera House Tunbridge Wells, but it is now a Wetherspoons. And then we hit the London Run, where we are for some time, 3 or 4 weeks, upstairs at the Gatehouse, where is your chance to drink ouzo with naked boys and girls. I mean, what could be better?
Well, I should think I'll book myself several tickets, if I may. Kit, as always, a real joy.
Oh,
Thank you so much
you.
for your insights, because I have to say, genuinely, you open up otherwise closed text and approaches to text. So I'm very grateful to you.
Oh, thank you. Not at all. And it's, as I say, this is just a load of fun for me and hopefully for the audience.
Musical talk. And there we are, Kit Hesketh-Harvey in conversation on 2 separate occasions, which I think showcase his vibrant comedy style and performance and personality. We first heard Kit and the Widow, Richard Sisson, talking about their act at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, a double act which lasted for 30 years and was one of the premier cabaret acts in the United Kingdom. And then after that, a conversation with Kit about his translation and production of La Belle Helene, which he wittily renamed Troy Boy, for the Merry Opera Company. A show I saw repeatedly and loved every time. Well, thank you for listening to this episode, where I've had a chance to talk about Kit. His death last week actually shocked me and moved me terribly. He was somebody who, even though I only met him a handful of times, was somebody I liked immensely. And someone whose talent was so wide-ranging that we will miss him terribly. I certainly will. Join me again next week when there's a chance to hear another conversation that I had with Kit, which I think showcases much more his passionate side, as we talk about his version of La Traviata. But for the time being, let me just thank you for listening to this episode of Musical Talk. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.